And what an absolute pleasure it is to be opening. It's the second event of the third edition of the Giving Life to Death Festival. And in Spanish, we say Dando Vida a la Muerte. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to this day. And this is the day where we will be joined by our very first guest, Jane Duncan Rogers, all the way from Scotland. Hello, Jane.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Jane, because what's interesting about the guests that we've chosen is that through some kind of not very wanted experience, but often we find that that experience that we didn't really want to receive becomes the most incredible gift for growth. So you started your company, Before I Go Solutions, in 2007 after your husband died, because you had discovered how important planning in advance for a good end of life is. So perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about the before Jane and the Jane now, and we'll talk about your Before I Go Solutions, big, as we call it, after that. So please, Jane.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Yes. So just to say that Before I Go Solutions was founded in 2017, not 2007. So it was a little bit, it's okay. That's okay. But up until 2010, I had been working, and for many years, in the personal development field. I had trained with Louise Hay. I had done lots of work with You Can Heal Your Life study groups. I had written books, and this is all before the internet. And in 2010, I had morphed into doing coaching, life coaching and small business coaching. And then my husband got cancer, a diagnosis of stomach cancer out of the blue. So this stopped us in our tracks, as it does. And we had to reevaluate things. It appeared that he had a relatively good diagnosis, a prognosis, if the operation that he had to have was successful, but it wasn't successful. And so we had about 8 months of what turned out to be a last year, knowing that he was going to be dying. And that last year was quite something. In fact, I would say, looking back in the 20 years of our marriage, that it was probably the most, the richest, even other than our first year. Usually the first year is pretty good. Because we were facing the end of everything that we had. And in that time, I received an email from a friend saying, you need to get him to answer these questions. And the questions were things like, what kind of coffin do you want? How do you want your body dressed? And what are your passwords? Really hard hitting and in your face. And she had to send that email 3 times before we responded, because I didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it. But we did eventually sit down, and we actually had a really good morning addressing all these questions. Now, I know that sounds weird. The topic was his end of life, but actually we were creating a project together in a way, and we knew that it would really help me afterwards. So we did that. And then after he had died, a couple of years later, I published my story, Gifted by Grief. And it was I wrote about the questions in here, and that was the chapter that people wanted to know about. And in the space of about a week, people said, I think about 10 people said to me, I need to answer those questions too. So eventually I go, all right, okay. I put on a local workshop, it sold out. And that was the very beginning of me doing this work, feeling guided, if you like, having discovered another gift. There were lots of gifts that came out of Philip's death, but this Before I Go Solutions is probably the biggest one.
I would imagine, Jane, because I work in end of life, and so obviously for me as Glynis, it's very easy to discuss all of the necessary things that do help. Yeah. Because when I meet families before the funeral that they've asked me to do for them, very little information do they have, firstly, on what celebrants do. It's just that somebody has recommended me. So in that moment of shock and confusion and all of the other emotions that are just rising and rushing everywhere.
Yeah.
I get that the dying possibly don't really want to have those conversations. So at what point, I mean, and Before I Go Solutions is brilliant because it's taking it from now. But you know, how did you feel when you didn't want to talk, when your friend sent you those 3 emails that she had to insist? What was stopping you? Because I can get it from the dying. I mean, that's just another little thing in life that they've got to attend to. And I think when you're dying, you want to attend to dying. So what was stopping you?
What was stopping me was, I mean, it was the thought, dare I bring up this subject that is so in your face, and the practical things which if you take it one step further means that he's not going to be here anymore. Yeah. Dare I say these things? You know, I mean, what are your passwords? It means that he's not going to be here to access those accounts that are so important. But I'm so glad that we did. I did pluck up the courage, but I did say to him, come on, we better do this because we need to get our friend off our back. You know, that was the motivation. Because she, by the way, has now trained with us as an end-of-life plan facilitator, which is wonderful, comes full circle in a way. But she was a long-standing friend who we trusted. But that was the motivation, to tell you the truth. And we were actually very surprised when we had a good time doing it. I mean, it doesn't sound possible, does it? But actually, that was my first experience, my own experience, but my first experience of what many other people have told me, and particularly couples, actually, when one person, it takes one person to have the courage and then to have a context within which to talk about it. If somebody's had a terminal diagnosis, then there's your context. It's a bit in your face. So that's why we are on a mission, if you like, to have people talk about this before it becomes in your face, like with a diagnosis, because it's a lot easier, because you're doing it in theory. You know, I mean, we all know we're going to die, but nobody pays attention to that, do they? We all know we're going to die. While you're not faced with it imminently, we're doing it in theory. We're planning ahead in theory. So that's what we encourage people to do, and that's what we mostly do. So.
And in your book, which you've already explained and you touched upon, that came out of the experience. And I suppose a lot of people talk about writing, and especially if one is gifted to be able to write, to express themselves, it's a catharsis. But you talk about back door, front door. Can you elaborate on what you're talking about, what that means?
Yeah, it's what I call front door, back door thinking. And basically, although I didn't realize this was what was happening at the time, when I reflected back, I realized this was what I was doing. I knew from my experience as a counselor and a coach, I had learned about bereavement, but nothing prepared me for the total slamming impact of this grief. It was just so strong and so painful. But I knew that the way to get through the feelings was to allow them to be there as fully as possible. Now, I knew that from my training. I knew Louise Hay had a famous saying, which is, what you feel, you can heal. So I held that as well in my head. What it actually meant in practice was that whenever I felt a horrible feeling, I had to let it be there. Now, that's the feeling coming knocking at the door. It literally knocks at the front door. This happens all the time, by the way, to everybody with all kinds of feelings. The ones that we like, we let in. We don't even think about it. Of course, we want them in our house. But the ones that we don't like, we tend to shut the door, close the curtains, put up the hatches, whatever, and try and keep it out. Now, that feeling that we don't want doesn't go away. It will hang around in the garden and it will find its way into the house one way or another eventually. Yeah. So my way of thinking about this was that when the feeling comes that you don't want, you just accept that it's there. You open the door, the front door, you open the windows, you open the back door as well. That's really important because you want the feeling to come in, deliver whatever message it's got, and then easily go as well, which is what feelings do. They're always changing, as you might have noticed. So that takes courage, though, because we don't, it feels horrible. And in Gifted by Grief I have been writing a blog about all this, and Philip had been writing a blog as well. So there are parts in there where I had to go back and I had to look at what I'd written in my journal. And I think the first time I did that was probably a year or maybe 15 months after he had died. And it was actually very good to do that, because I'd forgotten how painful it was. I had forgotten, but boy, was it painful.
So talk to us about journaling, because it's fascinating that both of you took that time in the process of going through a diagnosis and then coming towards the realization that actually the success is not necessarily the unsuccessful, but how you're going to process. So give us some tips as listeners, what it is that you found for the journaling and how you know that it helps.
Okay, so I've been journaling most of my life, from my 20s anyway. And so it's always been a go-to resource, if you like. Sometimes I have felt it's been my only friend. And when you're grieving, and I was grieving before Philip died as well, so I was processing all this kind of stuff that was going on. Of course, it's wonderful to be able to talk to friends, and maybe you even have a professional that you can talk to. But there's such a lot. It really helps to be able to just put it into what I consider to be a friend, which is my journal. Nobody else is going to look at it. That's not the point. It's a place for me to get my feelings out on paper. Now, when I do that, written by hand, it's not the same typing it on the computer. Take it from me, I've tried, because I can type a lot faster than write. But anyway, in the journal, it doesn't matter if I can't read it. I just poured out my feelings, literally, quite often using colors, lots of swear words, lots of great big capitals, just to get it out, which sometimes, not always, but sometimes made me feel better. And because I never went back to read them. I only ever did that because of the research for the book. Because the point is not to necessarily go back and read them, although that's another way that you can use journaling if you want to. You can go back and see what you've learned. The point for me was to let go of the feelings that were coming, to let them go out the back door. So using the journal, if you like, was a way of doing that.
Wow. I must say, I'm just about to be very radical, because my late mother, has got so many notebooks that I actually want to embrace that letting go. And I'm already imagining a fire.
Yes, exactly.
when we can do that, So
let me say something about that journal, because people don't often think about this. If you are a journaling sort of person and you're preparing ahead, in terms of the fact that one day you won't be here, if you don't want your journals read by somebody, you need to take care of it beforehand. Really important. Because it's quite possible they will be read. So that can be difficult. And you might only want to get rid of some of them, but it's something to really think about very consciously, because there might be stuff in there that is hurtful to people that was never intended to hurt them. It's just you getting your feelings out.
Wow, good advice. And that, of course, brings me on to wondering that you had this experience, you wrote the book after the death of Philip, and then fast forward out of that book, you realized that this was the section that would be the foundation for Before I Go Solutions. What is it that people want to work on? Is it just the password words, or is it the funeral that people talk more about, or is it wills and legacies, or is it the before, the power of attorney and the power of making decisions, the what do you call it in England, the living will?
Yeah.
Tell us about the Before I Go Solutions. What do you feel people really want to know more about in being prepared?
Yeah, good question. Because there's a huge variety of answers, because some people already have their will done and feel fine, think they've got everything done, and that's wonderful, which of course, once they learn a bit more about what our actual end of life plan is they discover that actually there's a lot more to it than a will. But if you've got your will done, then you won't be interested in that. If you're happy with it, if it's up to date and everything, but I have to say most people are not in that position. So, however, we all as a society know that a will needs to be done, whether we've done it or not. So it's a very easy way to enter into this arena, if you like. Even a funeral, the fact that a funeral happens is a relatively easy way to enter into this. And especially if you have a context. Now, I talk about having the 3 C's in place for having a good death conversation. And the first one is you have to have courage. I've mentioned that already. One person has to have the courage to bring the topic up. But please don't try and bring the topic up without a context. Now, ideally, the context is not going to be, that somebody close to you is already in the process of dying, because you'll be taking care of this earlier. But it could be, for example, the Queen in the UK has just died. That's given a context to everybody to talk about what they might want in their funeral. Now, she had a really good end of life plan done many years ago and kept up to date all the time, which she approved of. All that stuff that was in the funeral, she approved of it in the actual service. I've lost track of where I'm going with this.
The 3 C's.
3 C's, thank you. The third, so the second C is the context. So you need a context. And it might be something as simple as I was thinking about Uncle Joe, who maybe died several years ago, the other day. He popped into my mind, and I remembered that he had a particular need for his funeral, and he really liked that song. And it made me think, what song am I going to have? That sort of thing. That's what I mean by context. And then the third C is considering it as what I call a death chat. So it doesn't have to be a heavy conversation. This is really important, because we tend to think that it's going to be morbid or somber or whatever, or, black clothes and all that. It doesn't have to be like that. Because when you're doing it, quotes, in theory, you're slightly distanced from it. You are looking ahead to something that will happen, but it's you can be light about it, not lighthearted, but you can have a light conversation, which is this is how I relate to it and how all our facilitators relate to it as well. And it is absolutely possible. And, another thing here, I believe that many people deep down secretly would like to be able to talk about this easily, especially with the people that matter to them. I don't know how. So start with the 3 C's. You'll be going somewhere very well.
and again, that is that putting it into context, just taking that first step is really going to help family members approach it, because we all hear the person, I don't want to talk about it. But then when they do start, they realize, well, actually, I do want that song at my funeral.
I know.
And so tell us about Before I Go Solutions, because we know that this is an opportunity for people to actually be informed, get informed, and either take it further, because that's part of what Before I Go Solutions offers. But tell us about the sort of general, what is it that you're out there to change in the world?
Well, we have a big mission, which is to have end-of-life plans be as commonplace as birth plans. And I just imagine that, because birth plans, everybody knows about birth plans and don't even think about it unless you happen to be the one going to be giving birth, in which case you make a plan. If we had the same attitude towards the one thing that is going to happen to everybody, then that would be a very different world indeed, because we would be more at ease talking about this sort of thing. It would be a normal part of the conversation. We wouldn't talk about it all the time. You don't talk about birth plans all the time either, do you? So that's our big mission. And within that is our main educational thrust, if you like, is to enable people to talk about dying, death, and grief more easily, more comfortably, and then, as a result of those conversations that they're able to have, to take action based on whatever decisions they made in those conversations. So, say you're having a conversation about the content of a funeral, or what your passwords are, or how it is you would like to be treated or wouldn't like to be treated towards the end of your life. That's great that you're having the conversation. And there's another step. You need to get it written down, because if you're not here or you're not able to speak for yourself for whatever reason, then I can tell you right now, it's amazing. People's memories, they remember things in different ways. And that's why we need to have things written down.
Wow, that is such great advice. That really is. It's quite interesting, the lack of preparation, even amongst the professionals attending to the sick. And if you're lucky to be in palliative care, then obviously the whole idea behind palliative care is a team approach. So somebody will be asking those questions, and even the end of life doula movement, that will be something that we will be touching upon. When people find you, why have they come to you? Have you seen the type that's coming to you? Why? Is it because they, like you, have found themselves suddenly nobody's wanting to talk and they're trying to discover how? Just tell us about that, please.
Yeah, most people come now because we're emphasizing training to help people. Most people are coming they've had a personal experience somehow of somebody dying in their lives. Now, sometimes that can be an experience where the person had planned, and so they know how important it is because it's gone well. Much more often, they've had an experience where either the person died suddenly and there was no planning whatsoever in place, or they died over a period of time and there still was no planning in place. So it's still a mess. And so they've had their own experience of knowing how important this is, and also have their own desire to want to contribute to changing this, because this is a big cultural change that we're talking about here. And often the people are, I think the one common thing, regardless of what they might be doing as a job or whatever, the one common thing is that they like helping others, that they want to be creating meaning in their own lives, but also meaning in other people's lives. And they feel like they're making a contribution. That sort of thing is really important. I don't think we can talk about anything to do with life and death without having those things in place, because it's meaningful work. It really is. And if you're doing your own end of life plan all by yourself, which of course we've discovered that not most people don't do that because they need somebody to talk it through with, you're giving a great gift to yourself as well as your family. I mean, I say it's the best possible gift you can give to yourself and your family. But I am a bit biased, let's face it.
And we'll get onto that in a moment. But I would like to just let us look at the issue of having been prepared, then the grieving process is able to work its way through, because just seeing the mess that people have to deal with, that's taking away the energy that we need for the process of grieving. What do you find about that then?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely essential, and people don't usually realize it until they're in the middle of it, and that's when they realize how important planning ahead is, but that's too late, of course. So I think when we're talking about natural, healthy grief, yes, it's going to be painful, but it absolutely does not need to be exacerbated by having to sort out administrative messes, having to try and find the one account that you need, or that would be there if only that person was still alive, or even to try and just get into their computer where everything is. I mean, really basic stuff. For example, I heard of the other day of a woman who had died suddenly at the age of 52. Now, that's pretty young. she was single. She didn't have any children or anything like that. And so it was her mum having to deal with it, which, as you can imagine, absolutely tragic. Now, made worse by the fact that her mum, this woman, had all her contacts on her phone, and her mum didn't know how to get into her phone. It's something as simple as that, but hugely impactful. Yeah. So that's why we go on about passwords, and even the ones that you completely forget that you use all the time, like for your phone or your computer or whatever. I know we're not supposed to tell anybody else these, but actually think about it like this. At least one other person needs to know, somebody that you trust, of course.
Absolutely. That poor woman. I remember my sister, when her husband died last year, she knew he had quite a lot of money in an account, and he had always inferred, they hadn't talked about it, but he had inferred that she would know where to find the details.
Oh, no.
And she didn't. We laughed a lot because, of course, she wanted to try and access that money, and it was impossible. Finally, months later, fast forward, she did. But it's that importance of having the conversations, not, inviting people. Look, nobody's being morbid here. Talking about death is not promoting death. It's not like divorce. Just because your friend got divorced doesn't mean to say we're all going to get divorced. No. It's allowing us to use energy in a very good way. Tell us about your website then and your business, the practical side. So not for the trainers, we'll talk about that in a minute, but for the users, what can they get that's practical? Because I'm just thinking, are they going to get a massive book that they're going to fill out? Tell us about the resources, please.
Yes, of course, because, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with this, and then you don't do anything. So that's rubbish. So the very first thing that I invite people to do is go to the beforeigosolutions.com, where you can take a free quiz, which lasts about 30 seconds. It's called How Prepared Are You? And you're going to get a tiny introduction into how prepared you are. Now, it's only yes or no answers. So you're going to find out very quickly about, be introduced, let's put it that way, to some of the things that you might need to take care of. I wrote another book, this one here, Before I Go, The Essential Guide to Creating an End-of-Life Plan. Now, a good end-of-life plan. Now, if you were to read this book, which has all the thinking behind all the things that you need to know about, plus the second half is about what to do. If you actually did this, then you'd have your plan and you wouldn't need to worry about anything else. You can get that on Amazon. I have to say that most people don't do that. So there is a workbook that goes alongside that you can also get, that where it's just the questions, all the questions now, which they've been expanded a bit because I did some research. And then you write the answers in, or you type them in, and then you have your plan. So those are the easiest ways, the cheapest ways to do it. If you're not that kind of person who'll do that on your own, then you might want to do our online course, which is all online, and it's me, a mixture of videos and PDFs and things that you need to think about. You get a copy of the workbook, and you can do that. And if you need help to do that, then that's where our facilitators come in. But it's all entirely possible. And actually, let's be really honest here. Everything that is in this book, right, and all our work is out there on the internet for free. It's all out there. It might be in different places. It might not be so easy to access and find, but it is. But people don't do it, which is what we're about, helping you do it, which that's what I really care about, is getting those questions answered.
I'm very curious now as to know which is more popular, the before the advanced care decisions, that side of your work, or is it the funeral, or is it the whole passwords and those practicalities? Which is what people tend to want to know. I mean, are we as intelligent as we have the capacity to be, or are we only interested in the funeral?
Yeah, well, I think the funeral is the thing that most people know about and may have thought about already, and think that is sorted if they sort that. So that that's probably the way that most people come towards us, either that or through thinking about a will, but not having done anything about it. What they don't know, though, is the other aspects that make up a plan, which is, as you said, the advanced directives, or the advanced healthcare decision, whatever it's called, which is the document that you make about the treatment that you don't want to have towards end of life if you can't speak for yourself. Now, that's really important because mostly people will get treated because that's what we've got in our Western culture. But people don't know about that. So once they know about it, that then becomes very fascinating. Similar with passwords, with the thought of secrets, any secrets that they might have, like the journals I mentioned earlier. As once they start to think about the things that you don't normally think about, those are the things that take priority for them to think through and get written down. And then there's another aspect as well, which is what I call the household stuff, which is not just your financial affairs, which again, most people would think about, but it is your stuff, literally your stuff. I mean, look around your room right now, you'll see loads of stuff. Who's going to get it? If you had died yesterday, what would happen to it all?
Tell me about it. My late mother, dear Patricia, I would say to her, because she did 2 moves in the last decade. One just before our father died to us, downsize, and then to Mallorca to upsize. Right. And so there's still things in boxes. So for the past 5 years, I was saying, Mum, when you die, I will be the one having to. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know. But the thing is, it does matter.
It does matter because it's my energy now is caught up in how am I getting rid of all of that.
I know. And also the person who's dying or has already died hasn't appreciated how very difficult it is for those coming after to make the decisions, because they're grieving, remember, to make the decisions and to choose where the different stuff is going to go. Because I tell you, it will all go in a skip, or you will pay somebody to just come and clear the house. Now, that might be the way that you have to deal with it. But how do you know if you're going to you might easily miss something that is incredibly precious from your own childhood. So not great.
No, not great at all. And that piece of furniture from my childhood that's at least I was getting lots of emotions out, which brings me to the question, because I would imagine that this whole process of what Before I Go Solutions is offering and inviting is actually clearing a lot of emotional baggage as well. Do you find that at all parts, not only the user that I'm calling it, but also, and tell us soon as well about the people who are coming to train to be Before I Go.
So there's something about addressing the practical that allows the emotions to not necessarily even be felt or expressed, but to take a place that is okay. So I don't really understand how this works, because when I first started, I thought this is going to be a really emotional topic. People are going to be crying and they don't want to look at this and blah, blah, blah. It has not happened. Let me tell you, thousands of people now that we've worked with, it has not happened. There's something about having the structure of a plan that you just have to work through, that allows for you to do that, even about a very emotional topic, a potentially emotional topic. So although we do address that, for example, in our training, I can say more about that in a minute, it's not a big part of this. And that's what, if you think back to that original situation with me and Philip answering the questions, that was partly what I was afraid of, that, he wouldn't be able to face up to it, that we would be in tears and all this, and because it is a tragic situation. But it didn't happen. It was like the scaffolding around a house. In order to build a good house, you need to have scaffolding. It was like the plan gives the scaffolding so that you can actually create the house in the middle. I seem to have a lot of houses analogies here, don't I?
Well, there's a structure. It's called life.
Yeah, that's right.
So quickly tell us, Jane, because you do offer your course. Obviously, you're offering it in English, but who knows, you might be offering it in Spanish one day and adapting it to a slightly different market, because culturally and, things will be a little bit different. But people that are coming because they're interested in taking forward the Before I Go solutions, tell us about that. What will they get? What do they need to know? And then where do they take it?
Sure. So basically, being an end-of-life plan facilitator means that you get trained to help people take people through the process that we've talked about. It means that you also get your own plan done, because that's the very first part. You can't practice as a licensed practitioner without having done that. So that's really good. In fact, that is one of the major things that draws people into it. We then take you through the main aspects of this work that the facilitator needs to know about, so they can help somebody else do it, which is a different set of skills. Then we do, so we have the personal, the practical. Then part 3 is the practicing. So there's lots of practice goes on at that stage, where you're practicing working with groups and working with one-to-one with people. So there's quite a lot of coaching elements coming there. And then part 4 is the promoting. How are you going to get this out there? How are you going to actually be able to let people know that this is the work that you do, and attract them to work with you and get their end of life plan done, because that's the end result. So I talk all about it on, if you go to beforeigosolutions.com/info session, and I'm doing a live info session there that you can get an experience of me and ask questions if you want, or you can just sign up immediately, or you can book in to have a call with me beforehand if you want to, or our head trainer. We have a training team now. So
brilliant. And what would you say is the profile person that's coming to do that for you?
It'll be somebody who, as I mentioned before, they will like helping others. They could be in the caring professions. They might be already a coach or a counsellor, or sometimes we've had lawyers, later life lawyers interested, 1 or 2 financial advisors, or people who are already working in the end of life sector, maybe with senior people in one way or another, or have done that in the past. We have quite a lot of people who have had past work in the health sector in one way or another, but they're all keen on helping other people move from one place to another. So in this case, from having no plan to having a plan.
And the way forward for Before I Go Solutions?
The way forward. Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, we are growing. We're growing at the moment. That is our team of facilitators, our team of people who are getting plans done. Yes, as I said, we envisage this world where end-of-life plans are as commonplace as birth plans. Now, we might not get there within the next 5 or even 10 years, but every meeting that we have, we start with that vision. We're holding to that vision, because I want to change this culture. And then that's my personal legacy. I don't have kids, so I'm not leaving behind that. But I would be, when I die, leaving behind something that I felt I'd made a contribution to the world and made it a better place. And that's what floats my boat. And also, in this particular way, Philip, my husband who died, he gets to do it too, still throughout his death. I mean, it's wonderful.
I know. And the inspiring thing is, thanks to Philip, Before I Go Solutions came along.
Yeah.
And Jane Duncan Rogers is now a Mrs. Jane. So the circle of life is just so rewarding when we're open to it. And I think that what Before I Go Solutions has shown us is, and thanks to that friend that insisted in a way that was filled with wisdom, because that friend recognized how important it was that she got you to address something fundamental at end of life. I always think that a terminal illness is a gift in disguise as well. We don't want to die, any of us. That's obvious, but we're all going to die. And to have time, especially when we're supported by others,
Yeah.
To do that. So I'm sure that you recognize that. I'm interested in, because one thing I did see in the Queen's funeral recently was that Britain is diverse, culturally diverse, ethnically diverse. You yourself are Scottish, and I know that celebrants in Scotland are able to do different than celebrants in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So obviously the Scottish have a different approach, and they're quite willing to explore the ways they do things. Culturally, have you discovered differences in certain communities on how we do death?
Yes, there are, particularly in faith traditions or particular cultures. They will have a way of which they do it. Now, if somebody's doing an end-of-life plan in that, their challenge will be to actively choose to do it the way that that tradition says or not. Now, what we found, if you have a strong faith or if you have a strong culture that you belong to, that you probably want to do it, things their way. But there's still loads that need to be put in place beforehand. So the actual choices that you make might be determined by tradition or what you really care about in other areas of your life. But the planning still needs to happen. The actual thinking through and clarity about what you want to have happen is still important. So, for example, in your Before I Go workbook, you might not put anything in under the funeral section other than, I want my funeral to be done exactly as a Jewish funeral is done, and this is what it is. And that's incredibly valuable information to somebody who might not otherwise know.
Yeah, and I find as a funeral celebrant, I find it quite distressing that people are full, because what you say about people with faith is so important, because I find that they will have something that they can hold on to. But the tendency now that I'm seeing is to forego the funeral ritual.
Yeah. Now that is one of our pieces of education. So because I don't mind what people end up doing, but I do want them to make informed choices. So I think, for example, when my mum and dad died in the same week in 2018. So we had a joint funeral, and my brother and I decided that we would hold it in the crematorium. And they had a plan. Everything was organized. So this is what we did. Now, this is how I discovered the real value of a celebrant, because although it was wonderful holding the ceremony and all the rest of it, and we enjoyed doing it, I realized in the middle of it that I wasn't actually able to participate as a griever, if you like, a mourner. So I consoled myself with the thought that the crematorium was recording the whole thing. But the crematorium made a mistake and the recording was never made. So that's gone forever. So I've got my experience of having held my mum and dad's funeral, but I haven't had the experience of attending it. So that's the sort of thing that people need to think about in advance to make a conscious decision about. It doesn't matter one way or another what you choose, but it matters that you know what you're choosing, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. And yes, because what I hear is that, oh, I won't want a funeral. And I always respond with, yes, but the funeral's not for you.
No, that's right.
That's what I see where the issue lies, is taking literally what somebody used to say, rather than, like you say, making informed choices.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And also, I'm just thinking another thing, because my uncle died a couple of years ago as well. I was his executor, and he said it was quite clear he did not want a funeral. Now, I felt I had to honor his wishes, but the distress of his friends and not being able to come together and honor this person was strong. That was very hard for me to do, to say that there's not going to be one, but I felt I needed to do that, and I knew why he had said it and all the rest of it. But so I think it's really important to mark the occasion in some way. It doesn't have to be a full-blown funeral. it could just be that you gather together with some friends or family or but even one other person in the pub and toast that person, but to do that consciously, I think that's very important.
Definitely. And Jane, we're coming to the end of this wonderful, we could carry on because I mean, there's just so many layers to your story, your experience, being an impulse to create a service, and then within that service, all of the different aspects. I mean, we could be here forever, but we're not going to be here forever because we've got a whole busy afternoon lined up with more events and the rest of the festival. But we have our motto of the festival. The festival is giving life to death, dando vida a la muerte. And we have a motto which is porque la muerte importa, because death matters. So what does that bring up for you?
For me, it's like, well, I could say because life matters, because life and death are together. We cannot have one without the other, although we behave as if we can. And therefore, it's all incredibly important, and each needs to have the same weight. And funnily enough, when you face the end, it actually brings you more to life.
Beautiful. So thank you so much, Jane Duncan Rogers, for joining us today at our first event, international event of the Giving Life to Death Festival. And you can find Jane, listeners, you can see everything that they have to offer on the website, beforeigosolutions.com. Get informed. If you're in the UK, you cannot go wrong today or whenever you're watching this without having a thought on what are you going to do before you go and before you leave anybody behind, if they actually know what it is you want to do before you go. And don't forget that, Jane, just show us your 2 books again so people can see the 2 books. So you can grab these, Gifted by Grief and Before I Go, and both of them are going to be a great read whilst you figure out what to do. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
And to everybody else with us today, we shall be enjoying our first conference of the festival with Taira Velasco. And again, it will be looking at the similarities here, obviously set in Spain, on what it is that we need to be thinking about at the end of life and how we can be, making advanced care decisions and all of that includes. So the rest of the festival, you can find out more information in the link below, because there's wonderful events lined up. We are enjoying death cafes every day during the festival, online death cafes for all the different groups that perhaps could enjoy and appreciate a death cafe. So there's death cafe for kids with their carers, guardians. There's death cafe for young people. There's death cafe for animal lovers. There's death cafes for professionals working in the funeral and the health sectors, and there's also specific death cafes for survivors of death by accident, death by suicide, and all other deaths that came as a shock. So Jane, thank you so much for joining us, and to everybody watching, thank you for joining us as well.